The government has released its latest report on Closing the Gap. That's the name of a plan that aims to help Indigenous Australians to live as long as non-Indigenous Australians. But the report shows that it's not going very well. So what's the issue? Here's Matt, but first a warning to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers. This story contains images of people who've died.
Whether it's playing games like this one,
I like playing at the river.
or diving for turtles.
Hey.
These kids from Tabulan Public School in New South Wales love hanging out in the water. But while they're having fun, they're also staying active. And that's really important, especially for Indigenous kids.
It's very important to eat well and exercise and look after your body.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people live 10 to 17 years less than other Australians. It's mainly because they're more likely to get preventable diseases like heart disease and diabetes.
It makes me feel sad knowing that I may not live as long as some of my non-Indigenous friends in my class.
That's why the Close the Gap campaign was launched back in 2007 to improve the health of Indigenous Australians. State and federal governments teamed up to close the life expectancy gap by 2031 and to do something about the other gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, like helping more kids get to school, finish Year 12 and find jobs. Every year since, the federal government's released a kind of report card about the progress they're making.
With each report, we have an opportunity to assess where we must redouble our efforts.
This time around, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull announced there have been improvements in some areas. The number of Indigenous Aussies dying at a really young age has gone down, and a lot more kids are graduating Year 12. But lots of other targets still aren't on track. Many kids are falling behind in literacy and numeracy. Not enough are attending school regularly. Indigenous employment has dropped in a big way. And on average, Indigenous Australians still die about 10 years earlier than non-Indigenous Australians.
Today, I want to reaffirm my government's commitment.
The government says it's still committed to meeting these targets and closing the gap. But many experts say not enough progress is being made. Some Aboriginal leaders think it's because governments aren't working closely enough with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Closing the gap hasn't got a buy-in from Indigenous communities.
Others say it's going to take time for Closing the Gap to get results.
Let's not get in a panic because we think we're not there yet.
Back at Tabulan Public School, these guys know how important Closing the Gap is for them.
Close the Gap is a program for Aboriginal people to live a better life. It's very important to be healthy and look after yourself. Close the Gap to live a healthier life and to get a better education.
And while the latest government report found there's still a long way to go, these guys are doing everything they can to help close the gap for good.
It's a scene which shames a modern, wealthy country. The Australian government has promised to do something about it, but these are the squalid conditions in which many Aboriginal people continue to live.
It's not good enough, people. There's three old people we got there. They're pensioners, a couple of them on dialysis, and they're living rough. They shouldn't be in there at all. This is too rough.
It makes the job of health workers all the more difficult.
It's like a shantytown, some of the places I've been to. I mean, it's really shocking. The lack of money that they've got for proper nutrition and the lack of education and the lack of, it's just enormous.
This is a town camp in Alice Springs, where houses are overcrowded with extended families and are due to be refurbished. Last year, the people of this camp were promised that 3 new homes would be built here for them. Today, officials came along to break the news that there was no longer any money available and they'd have to go without. The authorities say repair work on existing homes will start soon. New houses have sprung up elsewhere in Alice Springs. These are the sort of improvements which will be praised by the Prime Minister Julia Gillard when she visits the town tomorrow. But 200 miles to the north is the remote community of Ambladawatch,
I'm living here.
where more families are sleeping rough, even though the nighttime temperature drops to below zero at this time of year. They told me they'd been evicted from their homes while they were being renovated. The authorities say they chose to sleep in the open.
Chipped away from my house here.
You're sleeping here now?
Yeah.
And some are still waiting for their houses to be fixed.
So you don't know how long you will be living out like this?
How long we'll be staying out here in the cold.
This is supposed to offer protection from the summer sun, not the winter cold, but this is where 3 children had been sleeping. Some families have been given proper tents to stay in, but it's hard to believe other Australians would put up with being treated like this. Outside contractors do the renovations, while most of the local men are unemployed, living off welfare handouts, as they have done for decades. Shopping is paid for using government-issued cards to ensure they spend taxpayers' money on food rather than alcohol.
It's as if the government is sitting at your own kitchen table and being intimate part of your life.
The government's tight grip on Aboriginal affairs in the Northern Territory has drawn criticism from the United Nations.
I was really surprised at their anger, their frustration, their anguish over the intervention policies of the government. In many ways, they felt huge insults to their dignity and their right to self-determination.
But there are Indigenous leaders who say their dependency culture must end.
They've always had other people doing things for them. It's always somebody else doing things instead of us doing things for ourselves, for our children. And I think that's the reason why that's the expectation.
The government, which formally apologised for past wrongs against Aborigines, has also pledged a better future. The policy is called Closing the Gap. But there is such a long way to go, it's expected to take decades for the first Australians to achieve true equality. Ian Woods, Sky News, in Australia's Northern Territory.